Tonight we'll have a talk from our visiting artists, Reyna Hernandez and Amber Hansen. Hopefully you've had a chance to see the exhibition in the gallery. If not, there's a reception right after this, so hopefully join us for that. Both of them have their individual work as well as some collaborative work that they do together, so we'll be learning about some of that. Reyna Hernandez is a painter and muralist who feels a deep connection to her homelands and indigenous roots. Reyna grew up in southeast South Dakota, and in Yankton Sioux Tribal Member. Throughout her work, Reyna utilizes mixed media to investigate cultural identity, hybridity, in relation to her indigenous bloodlines and Western influences. Reyna's work examines the complexities of her relationship to culture and place and is heavily inspired by the many star quilters in her family history. Her work is an exploration of Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota traditions and symbolism and the many ways that Western civilization has impacted Indigenous expression. Reyna received her B.A. in English and B.F.A. in Studio Arts at the University of South Dakota. In 2021, she received the North Plains Indian Artist in Residence at the University of South Dakota in Vermillion, where she also lives and works. Amber Hansen is a muralist and visual artist who values socially engaged and community-based artwork, as evidenced in her work throughout the middle of the United States and her promotion of creative engagement for all ages. Hansen's studio work is a dialogue between her formal education and her rural upbringing, which informs her projects as a community facilitator. She's the co-director and co-editor of the feature documentary Called to Walls, which you can view online at, is it calledtowalls.com?
You got it.
Good job landing that. A film highlighting the importance of community-based murals in the middle of the U.S. Joplin actually features pretty prominently in that film as well. That's when I first met Amber, was working on a mural here in Joplin. Additionally, Hansen is an assistant professor at the University of South Dakota, where she teaches painting and community-based art. And then their collective, Mural OTW. OTW's core mission is to work with the community members to create murals that capture the collective imagination of the place in which the mural will be located and to represent underrepresented histories and stories. OTW encourages community participation, collaboration, and mentorship. Design workshops are open to the public, providing opportunities for members of the local communities to imagine what goes on the wall and take part in discussions about the things that matter most to them. As a collaborative team, Reyna and Amber, alongside research consultant Sonia Hernandez, are interested in designing and creating a unique mural with people living in the place where the mural will be located. So we'll give it over to them. Thanks.
Thank you. I think maybe it's our mics.
I think it might be our mics.
Okay, I'm going to just move this quick, see if that fixes that. We could just talk loudly, I suppose. Oh, there he goes. Well, thank you so much to everyone for being here tonight, and thanks to Kyle and Scott for helping us install the show, and the student workers at the gallery as well. It's very helpful. When we're seeing the show tonight, walking in, everything just looked really great, and thanks for helping make it come to life. But my name is Reyna Hernandez. I'm Ihaŋktoŋwaŋ Dakota. I grew up in Gayville, South Dakota, which is a tiny little town in southeast South Dakota. Some of my earliest influences are my parents. They're both artists. So this is a quilt that my mom recently made. And I've always just really been drawn to her use of color with her textiles, but also the stories that she's telling within the work. She gets really intricate with her designs, and I'm just always blown away by what she does. But this quilt in particular is about these two red-tailed hawks, which are mostly monogamous creatures apparently, but it's the mate is flying home to the female. And so the storytelling aspect of her work is always really inspiring to me. And I've been really drawn to stories since I was very young. Shrek was one of my favorite movies, and I was always really interested in trying to draw things exactly the way that I saw them. Obviously not very successful. 13-year-old Reyna was not that successful at it, but I just like to share this one. I like the childlike quality to it, but also, I mean, I can really see where I was struggling a lot, and so I like looking back at some of my older work just to see what the struggles were, what I wasn't seeing. It's just kind of fun to do. This is one of the first paintings that I made when I started school, and I was really interested in creating self-portraits, and I still am. This was a very experimental piece for me. I was experimenting with collage, so like there's a lot of diamonds in the back. They're kind of hard to see, but those are fabric diamonds that I've collaged onto the canvas from my mom's craft. And so she gives me all of her diamonds that are cut untrue, so like they won't work on the quilt. So I titled this one Rejected Diamond, but it changed a million times. The titles always change. So early in school, when we were learning about like art history and different movements, something that I was noticing was a lack of black and brown bodies in this, in the tradition of the reclining nude. And so I saw this image. The bottom image is by Rebecca Belmore, who is Native. And I was really struck by it. I just really felt like seen and represented, and I felt like I hadn't seen a brown body in this way before. But I liked like the softness with like kind of like the brutality, that dichotomy. But I was really interested in what she was doing, and it reminded me of the painting by Ang up top. And I wanted to recreate it myself with my own body in that kind of like reclining nude position. And so this is the piece that I created in response to it. And I collaged the baby quilt that's draped over my hips because I wanted to make it more of like a personal narrative to me. I have had that quilt since I was an infant, and my grandma made it for me. But because of the nature of like how I get the fabric diamonds, they're just the ones that my mom doesn't use, I'm really kind of like restricted by the colors that I'm given. And so I was just trying to match the colors of my quilt with the diamonds that I had. And it started looking more like the flag, and it got me thinking about my relationship to both of these forms of textiles, like the American flag being representative of one thing for a certain group of people. It could be of like freedom and pride, but for Natives and their connection to this place, it's a very different story. And so thinking about those connections to different forms of textiles was something that was really interesting to me at the time. And so I started kind of leaning into this idea of like using the flag motif. And in this one, I was also really interested in reading poetry and writing poetry while I was painting. And so in the white stripes of the flag, I have collaged pieces of Walt Whitman's poem, Leaves of Grass. And I love Walt Whitman. This is not like a dig at him or anything. But he writes about the beauty of the American landscape. And that poem was written during the time that the Trail of Tears was happening. So questioning like whose American landscape is beautiful, depending on the time, and whose histories do we hear about and whose stories do we hear more often. So questioning those kinds of things. And then this is a painting that I made, and it was very experimental. I was really interested in like just trying to collage whatever I could find. And I had done another project with sporks, where I just had a whole bunch of them. And so I ordered like 2,000 sporks, which was dumb because I only needed like 100. I actually just got rid of the other box, and the other day I donated them. But I was interested in trying to recreate the look of a cowrie shell dress with the sporks on the side. When I was younger, I would go to powwows, and I had like a little cowrie shell dress that was like red, and I just remember being really fond of it, and just being really drawn to like the contrast between the white and the red. And anyway, so I decided to use a spork too because I was thinking about identity, hybridity, and the ways in which I came to form my own identity as being a Native person who didn't grow up like on a reservation, and I don't know the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota language. So feeling very like disconnected from that, but wanting to, poke at that conversation a little bit. So using sporks to represent this like hybrid identity. And also, I like that scene in WALL-E where he's like trying to figure out where to put the spork because it's like spinach of forks and he can't figure it out. I thought that was kind of cute and goofy. And so then in 2021, I was the Northern Plains Indian Artist in Residence at USD, and I collaborated on a couple of pieces with my mom. And so this is her quilt right over here. And it's just like, I've always just been so blown away by like this like kind of like hypnotic kaleidoscope thing that she does with her work. And the colors are so vibrant and beautiful. And just like all of the stitching that it takes to do that. And it's just such a beautiful image. And so I was like, Mom, will you make me some like diamond points with like intention, like I want water birds. And so she did, so on the painting, she quilted and sewed together the points, and I collaged them on, and then I painted a little bit over them to kind of give them like a neon effect, just to kind of look like they were like, kind of like casino lights a little bit. And this is just another piece that I made for that show, and being more intentional with like the diamonds in the bottom, instead of just them just like randomly floating around, it's like they're like shifting into like a darker color. And then this is the last piece that I made for that exhibition, and really just thinking about creation, like the 8-pointed star being representative of like rebirth and renewal. The 8-pointed stars would be painted on the outside of teepees after women would give birth. Thinking about my own decision to not have children, and my artwork being like something that my legacy or whatever I could leave behind was really strong in my mind. And so I asked my mom to make me another star quilt patch, and that's what she made for me. And I don't know, I've always really been into like kind of creepy stuff too, like things being like ripped open, I don't know. So I kind of wanted to combine those interests of mine. But again, also thinking about poetry and how writing really influences my process a lot. I included this poem as my artist statement, which I think it might be up in the gallery. I didn't check, but yeah. I'll hand it over to Amber.
Thank you. It's so fun to see your work, always. I'm just going to share some of my studio work, and then that will lead into some of the mural work. So I love that we're both sharing childhood artwork. This drawing on the right was a drawing that I made when I was pretty young, and I love the idea of drawing. Drawing to me is like the idea of something, and when it moves into like sculpture or painting, I think that idea becomes solid and solidified, and there's less notion that it's going to change over time. So drawing, you make a mark, you can change an entire concept or design just by erasing it. So I've had a deep connection and love for drawing, and in grad school, I started to kind of look back at some childhood work that I was making and kind of questioning what the motivations were for making work as a child, but also valuing those marks and those ideas in the same way that we value artists who have spent more time training or have spent more time on this earth. And in that time, I would take some of those childhood drawings and then enlarge them and reimagine what they could mean. And that's a theme that kind of runs through my work, playing with different types of rendering. Another theme that runs through my work is my relationship to the place where I live and the food I eat and animals. I grew up on a small acreage in northwest Iowa, and we spent most of my childhood growing food, caring for animals, and there was a really deep connection between life and death as you raise animals that are going to be eaten, or you spend time working in gardens. So that influence has continued to sort of run through my work, and it has caused me to look more deeply at the way that we're growing food and the processes that we're using, and it has led me to ask more questions about how did we get to this point? Is this the best way that we can be growing and cultivating and utilizing land, or are there better methods that we're not considering just because we think that this is the way it has to be? So one, in like my research and studying, I always like to ask questions, and when the question ends with an absolute answer, that's when I always know it probably needs more questions. One phrase that sort of would end any sort of questioning would be, well, we're feeding the world. That was sort of like, well, whatever's happening, we're feeding the world. But if you do more research, we're actually throwing away a lot of food. We could be saving a lot of food. We could be distributing food in different ways. So in my research of sort of like just noticing my landscape, then I like to do research that will also help me to dive deeper into experiences that I've noticed just while living in the Northwest or the southeast part of South Dakota now. I also have always had a deep love and connection for horses, and I started a drawing series in 2020 where I was just like folding up these horses and drawing them, and the horses became sort of this like stand-in for relationships or people. Some of the horses looked like portraits, but I loved like using this very simple way of generating ideas and then drawing them and allowing a message to emerge. And so we were talking to some students today about, different ways of generating ideas. And I love beginning at a drawing and not knowing what the piece will be about, but just kind of having an image in my mind that is captivating enough to sort of imagine and to want to realize and want to see. And then I always sort of use that to ask more questions about what that could mean. So I spent many years just focused on drawing because color is so complicated and there's so many things to consider. So for many years, drawing could fulfill, this space that I needed to imagine and explore. And it was really through collaborating with other artists on mural projects, collaborating with Reyna, that I have been bold enough to begin to really paint again. And so in 2020, I started painting using some of the mural paints that we've used and exploring color. And so this piece was inspired by these long walks that I would take during the beginning of the pandemic. And in Vermillion, the city was wrapping the playgrounds so that people wouldn't play on them. And the interesting part is I'd never saw anybody play on these playgrounds at any time, but it was a precaution that they felt like they needed to take, and in it kind of portrayed this eeriness within the landscape. And so I like to continue to sort of revisit different modes of expression or playing with flat space and folded space and utilizing photos that I take of the landscape in and around where I live. And again, thinking about our relationship to animals, our relationship to horses, and the impact that they've had on our lives, both developing culture, developing the landscape and building, and also being companions and friends, and how I don't think we have a great connection or have a great understanding or an arrangement with many of the animals that are within our lives. And then I added some process photos. I really love glazing and using glazing to create these really saturated and glowing colors, and then layering that on top of each other. So you can see the evolution. Oh no, maybe these didn't load. I don't think you're seeing them. Well, anyway, they change gradually over time. It's beautiful. I'm sorry you're missing it. But that will lead us to Joplin, Missouri. So after graduating from KU with a degree in painting and drawing, I was introduced to an artist named Dave Lowenstein, and he was beginning to embark on the Mid-America Arts Alliance mural project, where he was going to make murals in one of the states within the Mid-America Arts Alliance region, and Joplin, Missouri was one of those places. So I have fond memories of painting and imagining and designing the mural that you see here, and it's really wonderful being back to see it. It still looks great. We saw it today, and we had a great time developing that. And also developing and creating the film Call to Walls gave us the opportunity to come back and talk to people more about the project, and has allowed us to revisit, to share the film over time. And so my introduction to community-based art really struck a chord with me because I grew up in a rural community in Northwest Iowa, was training to be an artist that I thought existed only in gallery spaces, and then was introduced to this process that I thought could connect with people that I had grown up with, living in a smaller urban area that didn't have a lot of art opportunities. And so moving to South Dakota in 2016 to teach painting, it was really important to bring community-based mural making, but also mural making in general into the classroom. So many art books don't have murals when they talk about painting, and so many courses do not cover aspects related to working within communities and working outside of studios or classrooms. And the work just continues to feel more and more important as we create it. If you think of our visual landscape, images that are attacking the insecurities that exist within our identity. This is our visual landscape, and now it has crept into our computers and our phones and our personal space. So I feel more and more empowered, and I just believe in the work of creating a visual environment that allows us to tell the stories that we want to tell, but also to express the things that are important to us. And so I love this quote by Francois Matarasu, who wrote a book called A Restless Art, and it talks about ethical concerns related to community-based work, but also as a survey of community-based art projects. But he says that nature of the act is to create, to bring into being something that holds meaning or makes sense of the maker's experience. In this concept, art is power. It's not a good. Its moral, ethical, and political value is inseparable from the meanings it carries and the uses to which it's put. And this is why everyone is guaranteed the right to participate in the cultural life of the community and enjoy the arts, as stated in the Declaration of Human Rights. And so it reminds me that there are institutions or ways that we create barriers in relationship to our access to art, but also our ability to participate in creating it. And the community-based murals opens that and is inviting everybody to join and come to the table to share their ideas and their stories. So just to sort of briefly touch upon the process that we use to create murals, when we're invited to a community, or if we're working in the place where we live, we invite people who live in that place to join us in the process of imagining the mural design and to contribute research or stories. And we engage in creative activities such as writing poems together, drawing pictures, and then we share that to inspire the content for the mural. And within that, we also create a color study that we use as a key as we're painting the mural, and we create maquettes. So you can see some of those in the gallery, the maquettes and some of the linear designs. And so when we have the linear design, we'll then present it back to the design team, and they'll offer input of what's working well, what could be made stronger, and then we make those revisions. And then we move forward in painting the mural together. And as we build this process, we usually make a digital design that we then project onto the wall, where people can join in the process of transferring the linear design. And then we have a community painting day where anybody can come and help paint. And so after the community painting days, the painting is completed by the lead artist or the leadership team, or by people in the community who stop by and find that they enjoy painting and are really good at it, and they will sometimes stay. And then at the end, there's a mural dedication and celebration. And so in some of these projects, we're working with high school students or specific groups. In other spaces, we're working with entire communities. But it's always moving at the dedication when participants are speaking about the process of creating the mural together and how much they feel empowered to talk about the mural, to tell the stories that are represented in that place. This process has allowed us to create murals in South Dakota that I don't think would have been possible otherwise, by utilizing and working with a group of people to imagine and create something together, and also guiding them through the process and the evolution of the image, so that once we get to the end, they understand how we went from A to B to C to D, and that they're able to speak and talk about the mural as well, it oftentimes helps to bypass this process where one person who holds a lot of power would be able to say yes or no, or would dictate the content. And this has allowed us to make murals I don't think would have been possible without this process, but also would be far less embedded with beautiful stories and interesting and meaningful for us as well. Do you want to talk about it?
Well, I can talk about this one. So this is the most recent mural that we've painted, and it was a temporary mural, and we painted it in Washington, D.C. in July for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. And this was actually an image that was created for a parking ramp in the largest city in South Dakota, which is Sioux Falls. And so this design was unanimously chosen by like a committee, like the Visual Arts Commission and the Sioux Falls Arts Council. And to speak to what Amber was talking about one person having the power to shut things down or change the narrative, despite it being unanimously chosen, the mayor of Sioux Falls said no, but we could not paint it. So they took the job from us basically. But the reason why is because he was saying that it would remind people of the drunk homeless population in Sioux Falls, and he didn't want people to be reminded of that when they see this big mural. And so thinking about that, because it's such a loaded thing to say, and also speaking to process and who has power to change what our visual landscape looks like, there's just like so many issues that we were trying to address and with that controversy. But it's like, so, I mean, if that is what is coming to your mind, like, I mean, that's worth talking about, it's worth talking about homeless populations. How do we fix them? Are we just trying to hide them, make them go away? It's just such an interesting take to then be like, no, we don't want people to notice that. But also, why shouldn't someone who's seemingly houseless be celebrated? It's like, who are we celebrating? Why? What conversations are we having, and why? But this is the very first mural that I led, and this was in 2019, and Amber had approached me about leading this project, and I really never considered making murals ever. It didn't cross my mind at all. I thought I'd like curate or something, be a framer or something. I didn't really know what I was going to do with my art degree. And I really didn't think I would enjoy this process at all. I was like, I'll just, I'll make the $800 and I'll get out of there. It was just like, it just didn't cross my mind. But anyways, I really fell in love with the process, which was such a complete surprise to me. I mean, I really didn't think about community as being anything that I really needed or that I could be a part of. And the process really helped me feel like I had a seat at the table. And it also helped me to continue painting and making work. But it was myself and two other Native artists who led this project in Vermillion, South Dakota, and we met with members of the community and we asked them what they wanted to see in the mural. And a lot of the people who came to the meetings were interested in talking about their childhoods, about motherhood. There was a lot of flooding that was going on at the time in Vermillion and in the surrounding areas, and it was really devastating. And so we talked a lot about like the duality of water being something that gives us life and nourishes us, but can also just completely devastate something. And it can like put holes in cement and it can wash you away. And so it's like, there's such a powerful thing with water. We need it, but it can destroy us as well. One of the lead artists worked at the WHO Museum in Vermillion and was going through some of their old collections of photos. And he came across this image of this woman breastfeeding her two babies, and we all just like fell in love with it. Just like, it's very rare to see these like kind of old photos where you see like women or like brown women smiling. And so, she's like breastfeeding her babies and she's like nourishing them. And so we wanted to include that as a centerpiece in this mural because, like I said, people were talking about their mothers quite a lot. There's something really powerful there. But the star quilt design in the back is also my mother's, so speaking to that, knowledge being passed down, the things that we learned from our parents. And then something else that I really like to do within like the mural work is put iconic imagery or reference iconic imagery within the work. I think it allows people an avenue to feel like connected to the work, and then maybe their eye starts moving around a bit more. And I think it creates moments where people will pay attention a little bit longer if there's familiarity there. Sometimes artwork can seem to maybe go right over our heads. So I think it's important that we're trying to create this welcoming and inviting and familiar space to people, while also talking about some other things going on in the community. But this is the other side of that mural. It's on the side of a building, on the corner of the building. And so we painted this during the pandemic, and this was in 2020. And we were maybe not gonna do it because we were well, we don't wanna be the outbreak, the muralists brought COVID to Vermillion. So we weren't sure if we wanted to gather at the wall and be painting together, but we decided to go ahead and just do it. And it was actually such a healing thing for the community. There were people who'd walk by every single day to see the progress. Everything was shut down at that time, so it was really, people would make it a point in their day to come and see what we were doing because we were activating the space, and they would see the progress of what we were making. And so I really did enjoy the conversations that we had with people from a distance on this piece. And so here's an image of the full mural. And I'm just going to play a video that two videographers from the University of South Dakota made for this project. They just kind of kept showing up, and they're really interested in what we're doing. And so they asked if they could interview us and create a video to go along with what we were doing that explains it. And I think it's such a beautiful explanation.
We have to get out the presentation.
How do I make this big screen? Oh, start over.
Stories and how we learn to understand ourselves.
I wanted to create a space where people felt like they could come and kind of relax, but also think about things in a way that isn't combative. But I do think that art has a little bit of an obligation to create tension and create a conversation within people.
Public art projects like this are important because it gives people a space to gather and to talk about what it means to be a part of the place that they live.
I really like that we're taking up all this huge space in a public area to insert brown bodies and Indigenous femininity, because we don't talk about it very much. And when people do talk about Indigenous women, they talk about the traumatic things that happen to us.
Trying to incorporate the sort of Native American spiritual system of creation stories and how we learn to understand ourselves as humans into a wall that meets a corner. And honestly, at first it was sort of challenging.
To Lakota people, things are circular and things are always cycling and changing, the sacred hoop of life. What that other side is connected to this is where we come from. We know who we are. Things got fractured along the way. Bits of history were missing. Parts of where you come from are missing because of relocation. As we come together nowadays, we're finding different pieces of ourselves and of each other and putting them together into this sort of beautiful, fractured identity where we all belong.
The stories that come together within the composition are really reflective of the people who have gathered at the table at that time.
The way that this was based was that we met with members of the Vermillion community and we asked them what they wanted to see depicted in a public space.
The community is not only helping in building the mural or the thing that's being made, they're also a part of the process of creating the themes and concepts that are represented in the image.
It's not just lines. It wasn't meant for consumption. It was meant to beautify life.
I really wanted to create something empowered, and I wanted to reflect strength and empowerment back to our women and girls, because when you're only being reflected one side of the story and it's sad and it's traumatic, it's difficult to form an identity that's empowered based on those images. So I think that's my favorite part. Yeah, I really love that video, and it's another way that you can work with other people and collaborate on artwork. And I'm really glad that we have that little document of that project, because it was a really special project. Let's see. There we go. And so this is another mural that we painted in Vermillion. This one was commissioned, so it wasn't a community-based project. It's on the side of a hair salon. She just really wanted the shape of South Dakota and like some flowers involved, and then we gave her a sweet blowout because it was a hair salon. And so the figure in the painting is Zitkalasha, who was Yankton Sioux. She was a political activist, feminist, musician, writer. Her work really inspires a lot of my own work. She's just her writing about the boarding school era and her experience of like really loving academia, but like really missing her family and like feeling very torn between these two things is just so beautiful. And I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like, but the way she writes about it is just like, it's messy and it's complicated, but I love her work, and she's not super well known, but she lived in like southeast South Dakota, so like where we're from. And this is a mural that we painted in Wagner, South Dakota, which is my tribal headquarters. And this is in the gymnasium of the Boys and Girls Club. And this is an interesting process. I love the location of this one as well. I think that it's like in this gymnasium where it's like athletic, kind of like seems maybe machismo or something, but then there's like this beautiful artwork when you walk in. So it's like people aren't expecting to be met with a fine arts experience in this space, yet there it is. And you know, these spaces are already used as like community gathering spaces to watch sports together, and then to view beautiful artwork together. And this is one of those projects too, where there was, you know, we presented the linear design to the group, and there were things that they didn't like and they wanted removed. So, you know, we'd have that conversation with them about, you know, why we included it, and, you know, ultimately, most of the time we do end up making some of like the changes that they wanted. Like there were some windmills in the background, and they were like, we hate the windmills here. They just like block our view of the natural landscape. And we're like, that makes sense. We'll get rid of them. And the third panel over, with the girl holding the fawn, before she was holding a lamb, and one of the elders in the community was very triggered by that image because he had also grown up during the boarding school era. So his relationship to the Catholic Church was like very traumatic for him, and he was like, I really don't like it. And so obviously we changed that, and it's like, it was not our intention to create something that would be triggering to someone. So it is important to have those conversations, and we all interpret art very differently, and yeah, I just think that that's like the beautiful part of this process is that we're working with people to tell a collective story, and we want it to be a comforting one. And this is a mural we made in Sioux City, Iowa with high school students, and it was just after the pandemic and things were like opening back up, and I think that was like the first semester back at school. And so like they were really talking just a lot about how like their lives have changed a lot, like, you know, the ways that they communicate with one another, and like not being in school, then going back to school, but feeling like living their lives through these like rectangles, through their computers, through their phones, to communicate with people really had like a negative impact on them. And so thinking about social media and the ways we internalize the messaging on a lot of those platforms, so like external pressures to like continue going to school or to look a certain way, we decided to do these like two opposing worlds, like a utopia dystopia kind of thing, and like the top with the statue head being representative of like the stresses and anxieties that we feel from external pressures, and how we internalize that through the head, and how we also internalize things through our heart. And so the heart being like this more like hopeful image of like their dreams and aspirations and what they wanted to see in the world. And this is a picture of it from the street. And we wanted to play with that little hallway space and make it like, you know, somewhat interactive. So these hands are like coming down and kind of like embracing you as you're like walking through the hallway. And we painted this one in Centerville, South Dakota, which is about half an hour from where we live. And it's on the side of a bowling alley. And yeah, you know, just there are some projects that are a little controversial, and this one has good memories and not so good memories, but I mean, I love the painting itself. There is a story that we had uncovered in like their history book of the town, and it was about this guy who had a lantern outside of his like establishment, and he would leave it on for like people coming by on a wagon or whatever to like indicate that they were welcome. So it's like a beacon of welcoming. So we wanted to include that within the image. And then this is the most recent, well, besides the one we did in DC, this is the most recent one we did together, and we also painted this one with high school students from the Vermillion High School's Gender and Sexuality Alliance, and they wrote a grant for $10,000 to have a mural painted in their school, and the school didn't want their mural in the school, basically, so we had to find a wall, which, you know, in this way, it's better because they're like, actually, their message is being seen by so many more people, not just people who are coming in and out of the school. And you can really see the effects of how empowering that is to young people when their voices are heard in this kind of way. Like when we began meeting with them, they were pretty shy and timid, and they really didn't like speak up very loudly. But when we had our dedication, a lot of them were like, "We'll speak. You know, we want to speak," and we're like, "Okay, like that's great." And their speeches were just like so empowering, and they were so passionate about what they were saying and what they were doing. And I just think that that transformation and that art can do that for people. It can make them feel empowered is like such a beautiful thing to witness and to be a part of. And so I think this is probably one of my favorite murals that we've made together. But like the quilt too, that's my mom's star quilt pattern. But we probably had maybe like 50, 60 people painting on that. So it really is like this visual representation of people coming together, of like community to make something together. And I love that that's also part of the centerpiece on that. And I think that's it. Do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, I'm just like looking at this piece now, and it's reminding me of the mural that we painted here in Joplin. There were just so many people who helped on that wall. And that doesn't always happen on all the projects based on, you know, some projects like just don't, they fill up really quickly, or there are not, you know, many people who are interested in the painting process. But I remember painting the mural in Joplin, and there just being so many people who painted on that mural throughout kind of the entire process. And similarly with this project. And the mural assistant for this project too was an artist who just showed up on the first day to help prime, and then just stuck it out throughout the entire project. So
Which is rare. It's a lot of work because some people don't really stick around that much. But
yeah, the priming is the least amount of fun. So if you stick out that part, then so yeah, just like a lot of people who joined in the painting, who came out to celebrate this, and then that this was also a mural that that people were hesitant to create in the high school. So this like hesitancy of creating something or anticipating some backlash or some poor reaction to it. For us, I mean, it's like if people don't like the mural, we are going to be painting in front of it for a month, so they can tell us. But oftentimes, you know, we really get really positive feedback in creating them and sharing them. Yeah. And with that, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
I have a question for Reyna. I'm interested in your writing and painting sort of together. Does it happen? Is it the case that you're base a painting on a specific poem very often, or is it sort of a more ongoing?
I feel like it's very fluid. I mean, like when I'm reading poetry, I feel like my favorite poetry is very visually charged. And so it's more of like a feeling, and like I feel like when I'm reading poetry and I'm painting, it's like guiding my hand based on like the rhythm of the poem or the way that I'm reading it in my head. And so a lot of times the content isn't necessarily guiding it, but I'm mostly reading poetry that's like already talking about like body as landscape, or like relationships to landscape based on like where you're from geographically. And so, I mean, I think that my two interests within writing and reading poetry and with painting are just that's very similar.
So I didn't catch everything you were saying about the mural that you had up in Sioux Falls, or it was supposed to be for Sioux Falls, and then they said no? And what were the reasons for that? I didn't catch some of what you said, but.
I mean, it was really a case of like the mayor having all the power to say yes or no to an image that he felt was too controversial. I think there was also an issue with the fact that there wasn't a shirt on the figure, which comes up kind of a lot. Like in my hometown, like we had a Raider painted up in the basketball or in the court or whatever. Anyways, it was just the bust, and the people in town were like, well, you need to put like some straps on his shoulders, because otherwise people will think he's not wearing a shirt. And so it's like, even though it was like cut off here,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, I mean, you're imagining nipples on on this pirate, like, and so, I mean, I think that that's the problem though, a lot of times, is like they want more clothes on the figures too, but like, what is confirmed about the controversy for the Sioux Falls one is that he just didn't want people to be thinking about homeless Native people laying on the ground.
Interesting. I lived in Sioux Falls for a dozen years. That's where a couple of my kids were born, and there's a lot of reactionary stuff, and this was many years ago. But I'm really sad that they didn't put that up. That was a marvelous mural, and it just would have brought so much into there. Where was it supposed to go? On what building, do you remember?
So there's this parking garage on 10th Street. I don't know if you're familiar with 10th Street still, but so they built this like giant parking garage because they were going to build this big like shopping mall, hotel, like mega center thing for like people to come and stay at. And like, anyways, it fell through, and it was like a big controversial ordeal because there was like a lot of money that was wasted on the planning and designing. And so then they were basically stuck with this like really ugly cement wall for a parking garage. And so they were like, well, let's try to beautify this space and put a mural on it. And we applied, and they had initially, so they gave it to us, they took it away, and then they were going to hire an artist from Florida who was non-native to paint Lakota hoop dancers, which is just also controversial, because it's like, it's very problematic because it's cultural appropriation, and it's like, okay, you're taking an opportunity from an actual Native person telling a Native story to hire a non-Native person to tell a story through like the settler gaze, essentially. And so that was problematic as well, and so they had to shut that project down, and then months later they found another artist to just, they cherry-picked an artist of their own choosing to paint what currently exists there, which is, if you get a chance to Google it, it's wild.
Even in the 90s, 80s, 90s, when we lived there, I didn't realize how much prejudice there was against the Native people. I mean, we moved there from Minnesota, didn't think anything about it, but I had friends that were Native, went to school with it, and just like, I don't understand this, what, and it's this real separation, one side of the river from the other side of the river, and reservation, not reservation. I thought maybe it had gotten better. Apparently not.
You would hope. Yeah, and I mean, in a city and in a state where there's so much inspiration taken from Lakota, Dakota, Nakota culture, you would just think that we would like get it together, but.
Well, thank you.
I was just wondering how difficult it is to get a lot of the shading and toning down, especially for like the human flesh, and even like in this depiction, like the horses, especially since it is on a pretty large scale.
It's tough, it's frustrating. It's a lot of, like, so for instance, Amber was painting those horses, and it was a lot of her up on like the boom lift, kind of like yelling down to me, like, first of all, does it look scary? Like, am I like in the lift, does it look like it's stable? And then it's like, how's the shading on the chin? Like, so it's a lot of like having to translate through, somebody else's eyes, but like, because you want to step back from it to be able to see what you're doing, and that's not very doable when you're in a lift. So it's like, go up and down. But I mean, we do kind of like a little bit of like outlining for where things should go. I actually realized that I have a hard time transitioning to a smaller format. Like the large ones, I have the hang of it a little bit now, but I've tried to paint skin tones on a smaller scale, and I've lost it. I'm like, it just went somewhere else. I don't know where it went. I used to be able to do that, and that was my foundation. But now that we've been painting so large for so long, I don't quite remember how to do that on a smaller scale. So that's harder for me actually at this point.
And we use a projector initially to project the lines, but we'll also bring it out if we're stumped on something, because yeah, if you're like up in the air in this like, bucket, you can't step back and look at things. So we will use a projector for some of the detail, but we also use iPads as well. And we'll take a picture, after the day's over, and we, take a picture of what we've done, and then we can kind of plan out what we want to do the next day. And that way, if we have help, we can show people this is exactly what this is going to look like. But also we know what it's going to look like, so you're not guessing in this like detailed work, because it really is, there's like a finite amount of time we have the equipment rented. So you kind of like, all right, I need to get like this looking okay, at least by the end of the week or by these hours. So it is, it's a nice challenge, but also you're up really close to it, and then you kind of step back and it looks great. It looks great from afar, too.
Okay, well, I guess, do you guys have anything else you want to add, or?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, please join us over in the gallery for a reception immediately following this, and you can ask them more questions and have some refreshments and see especially if you haven't seen the work in person yet, make sure and get over and see that as well. So thank you very much for coming. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.